So then like the last, I don't know what it is. Let's say it's the last, it's not a quarter of a mile. It's less than that. But you come down the main street and then you make a right in front of a middle school, and that's where it ends. And I can hear the crowd like just getting all jacked up. And so then I do a full on sprint, like everything I've got left in the tank. So then when I finish, I've missed my goal. I didn't make the 10 hours. I was just over. I finish, but then my immediate thought is, could I have sprinted longer than that? Like, could I have done more than like, so it was a really weird experience. On the one hand, going into the day, I had no expectations because I knew that I really hadn't done enough work for the goals that I wanted to achieve. But I also knew that I had nothing to lose. Like, so what? Who cares? Like, if I finish, I finish. If I don't finish, I guess maybe I'll try it again. That was my second thought when I got across the finish line. I'm never doing this again. Like, this is ridiculous. So yeah, it's a weird, like, in many ways, it kind of sums up who I am. Somebody gets an idea in my head, and I feel like that's a worthwhile or an interesting challenge. I'll go for it.
Mr. Bennett, welcome on the show.
It's great to have you. Great to have me.
So I think it was Thanksgiving break, and we came back for our first practice, and I was putting my shoes on. I was checking my weight on the weight scale, and I overhear some people saying that they heard you run 50 miles over the break. And I think it was Thanksgiving, might have been winter, but I was pretty amazed to hear that because I know that you came in the room, you didn't have much wrestling experience, but when I heard that, it was pretty insane to me to hear that. So tell me that story. I haven't heard the full story yet.
So it's a really long, sort of convoluted process to get to that 50 miler. It's the JFK 50 miler, and it's run in Boonesboro, Maryland, which is near Mercersburg, where I was for a long time before Peddie. And the beginning of the run is on the Appalachian Trail. So a buddy of mine, we've hiked the Appalachian Trail, and we started in the middle. So because I lived in that section of Pennsylvania right above the Maryland border, we had a weekend where we just decided to go out, hiked for a few days, and we were simultaneously miserable and had a blast. All three of us that first year, my brother, my college roommate, and myself, and it was my college roommate's idea. We did this 3-day weekend hike. We ended in at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy headquarters. And in that section of hike, you go through Maryland and you end in West Virginia. And it's a really gorgeous section, but none of us had really done that kind of hiking before. And so although we kind of knew what we were in for, and my buddy had done a bunch of hiking out west, we just didn't know what we were really in for. And so by the time that last day came around, we looked like ridiculous group of guys that none of us could walk. Like, my brother's knees could barely move. They were swollen. My buddy had just recovered from some back surgery, and this was kind of a test run to see how much progress he had made. So his back was shot, so he was using his walking sticks as like canes to get down the last like mile. And I was chafing in a part of the body that no man ever wants to have chafing. So I looked like an old Western cowboy, like walking bow-legged, because it hurt so bad for my thighs to touch each other. So the next year I was like, all right, I'm going to get ready to go. I'm going to be ready for this hike this year. And so I did something I had never done before, which is I really committed to running, because I decided just on my own that cardio was my big problem. So I started running. And that second year, it went way better. I felt like I was in much better shape. So then the third year, I was like, okay, running's the secret. So then I really got into it, and I grabbed a half marathon training plan, and I followed that. And my goal was the first day we stepped off on the trail would be the day that I would be ready for a half marathon. And that seemed to work. Well, then over the years, I started to do that fairly consistently, but I started to aim towards a marathon. So I wanted that first day to be ready that I could go run a marathon. And over time, I just kept doing this. And then eventually one year, maybe 4 years ago, I was like, why don't I ever actually run a half marathon or a marathon? Like, I do the training, I get to that point, I run half marathons and marathons in my regular, like, running alone. Why don't I just go enter one? So then I did a half marathon in Philly. Then a couple of years later, I did a marathon in New Jersey. And then COVID hit, and all of those things sort of shut down, or you ran them virtually. And then the summer of 2022, a kid I grew up with, I was back at his house. We remained friends. We're in touch pretty regularly. I was back at his house, and his birthday's 9 days away from mine. So he makes this offhand comment, and he's a bodybuilder. He's a former semi-pro hockey player. Like, the dude's a legit athlete. He and I used to work out together in high school, and I could never keep up. The only time I could ever keep up was on leg day. So I'm at Mike's house, and he says, so I'm thinking next year 50 and 50. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's this 50-mile race. And right away I was like, the JFK 50? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, dude, that's in my old backyard. He's like, are you serious? I said, yeah. Where it starts, the Boonesboro Fire Department was a fire department that we used to regularly run mutual aid with. I'd taken training classes. Like, I know that town. Like, we used to play them in sports. Like, I know that area really well. And I've done that section of the Appalachian Trail. I mean, 10 years ago, but I've done that section. He's like, all right, we're going to do this. I'm like, okay, man. So that's in like June or July of 2022. So come around to June of 23, we're both, a month or so away from our 50th birthdays. And his son is at a lacrosse tournament down in Delaware. And so he shoots me a text. It's like, hey, I'm going to be in Delaware. I said, all right, I'm going to meet you down there. So we're having dinner, and his wife and his youngest son are there. And his youngest son is probably 14. And I'm like, so did you sign up yet? And he looked at me. I said, 50 and 50. And he goes, oh, no, I haven't registered yet. And his wife goes, what are you talking about? And I'm like, last year, Mike said we're doing this 50 and 50, this JFK 50. And so they started in on him. They're like, there's no way you're doing that. There's no way you're doing that. And I'm like, well, I signed up. I registered. And he's like, all right, I'll register. So he registers. And I know in the moment, there's no way he's going to do this. I love Mike, but he's not a runner. There's no way he's going to do this. And I'm still using it as like motivation of just always being in shape. And I've told my friend Jason, my college roommate, I tell him all the time that the biggest gift he's ever given me was this Appalachian Trail hike, because every single year for the last 14 years, I've had to be ready to strap on a backpack and go walk in the woods for anywhere from 7 to 10 days. It's grueling. It's awesome. It's a total disconnect from everything else in my life. Like, it's just so different. But the way that I get ready for it has become running. And then, like these things often do, running has become my outlet for so many other things. Like, mentally, I just feel so much better when I'm running regularly. When I stop running regularly for whatever reason, whether it's injury or illness or just time, I can feel it. I'm more tired. I can't concentrate as well. Like, I just feel it all the way around. So anyway, so I was registered for this thing, and I ran a half marathon in preparation for it. I was on schedule. I had this whole long, like 6-month schedule, and I was hitting all my benchmarks. And I had set various goals. Like, when I run my half marathon, I want to run it in under 2 hours. So I got to Philly. I do it, feeling great, sort of. 3 days before Philly, my feet are shot. Like, I don't know if I have plantar fasciitis. I don't know if I have heel pad issues. I just know that I am miserable, but I'm going to go for it. So I do the half marathon, do it in under 2 hours, but the next day my feet are just trash. So I take like 3 full weeks off, but I am so cheap. I've already committed the money to this 50 miler. So I'm like, I got to find a way to do it. So I just keep going. My buddy, a week out, I'm in Michigan, coincidentally. I'm in Michigan with staying with my brother, and out of the blue, my friend Mike texts me. He's like, "Hey, I feel awful. My kid's got a lacrosse tournament. It's going to be a bunch of college scouts there. Like, I just can't do this." And I was like, "Bro, it's totally good. I'm going to be there. I'm doing it. I'm going for it." So I decided I'm going to do this race no matter what. I'm going to do this race. So I put in the rest of after my sort of hiatus of running, I pick up my training guide, and I was just like, all right, I'm going to just pretend that I did all of the stuff up to this point. I'm just going to jump right back in it, which means like I'm going to run 5 miles on Monday, 7 miles on Wednesday, 3 miles, 5 miles, and then on like the next Sunday, I'm going to run 18. And so that's what I do. And that 18, I'm dying. Like, I am dying. And I just keep doing that. And then we're about 2 weeks away from the race, and I have to run between the Saturday and Sunday. I have to run upwards of like 40 miles in those 2 days, right? And they've got it separated out. Like, one day you run 15 and one day you run 25 or whatever. And so that's what I do. The last 2 weekends, I'm like, come hell or high water, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to get these runs in. But I had not really looked at the map yet of the course. And then 10 days before the race, I actually look at and largely because my girlfriend was like, "Have you looked at this map?" And I'm like, "No." She's like, "Do you understand that you're running straight up for like the first 6 miles?" I'm like, "No, what are you talking about?" And so I look, and that's what it is. You start in Boonesboro, Maryland, in the middle of town, and you run out of town and you run straight up the Appalachian Trail. And it is this ridiculous ascent of like 1,000 feet. And then it's a ridiculous descent, that same 1,000 feet. And then you're on a towpath, a canal path, which is just as flat as could be, right? So the initial, whatever it is, 10 miles or so, is just this ridiculous up and down. But then you were on this long flat. And then it's sort of rolling roadway until you get to the finish line. So I wrote down all these notes, right? Like, I had this goal. I was going to do it in under 10 hours. I was going to do it. I told myself that, because I'd read a bunch of logic on how to do it. And I just told myself, okay, we're not going to run up the hill, because I'm a downhill hiker. Everybody else in the world, the vast majority of hikers are uphill hikers. They love uphills because downhills are harder on the knees. I love downhills. It suits my personality. I just let it all fly. I just get up on my toes and I just bounce down the hill, semi out of control, maybe even totally out of control most times. So I was like, okay, just slow your roll going up the hill, like walk it if you have to, that's fine. Light jog at best, like just keep your heart rate. And then once you get to the top, just let it fly. So that's largely what I did. But it's way different once you get into it. Like, it's so painful. Everything about it is so painful. And then there's all these moments where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, what does it really matter? Like, I'm 50 years old. I'm not going to win the thing. Like, that's not even anywhere remotely near a goal. Like, the dude who's going to win is going to run this thing in about the same time it takes me to run a marathon, right? He's going to do 50 miles in the time it takes me to do 26. Like, that's going to be the result. And that is exactly what happened. But Miss Miller, who Robin Gerber, who you may remember, she was the assistant athletic trainer, maybe your freshman year, maybe your freshman year. And then Meredith Salmon, who taught biology up until a couple of years ago. So Gerber now works at an orthopedic office. Salmon is an FBI agent. So Gerber and Miller go down. Salmon comes over from DC, and they are my crew. So as I'm dying, and we had set up like, at this point, you're going to meet me. And at this point, about halfway, I'm going to change shoes. I'm going to change socks. I'm going to change my shirt, change my hat. Like I'm going to essentially have a fresh kit on. And then in my mind, I was thinking, and then at that moment, I'll decide, like, I'm either going to finish this thing or I'm not. And as I'm coming into it, and I know they're going to be up ahead, I'm like, well, I'm still on my pace, but I can tell that I'm losing it, right? Like I'm not going to be able, I'm going to have to run faster now than I did in the first hour. And I'm just like, I can feel it. I can feel it. I just don't know, like, am I going to make it? And as I'm within a couple of 100 yards, I can't see them. I hear them screaming my name. All I can hear is Meredith Salmon and Miss Miller screaming my name. And it was everything. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So we change, I eat, they rehydrate me, they refill my hydration pack. And it was like, I had just as much energy now as I had when I first started. So I'm like, oh, all right, let's go. So I get going again. So I'm doing great now. Now I'm flying, I'm doing great, but it doesn't last very long because like the body is the body. And the reality is I had not trained well enough. I was not ready. Connor asked me that day you're talking about when we got back from break. So we had been in wrestling for a couple of days and we go to Thanksgiving. This run was the Friday before Thanksgiving, right? So Connor had said something to me like, what are you doing over Thanksgiving? And I was like, I'll tell you when we get done. I said, there'll be something when we get done. So then after that, he was like, so you think you're in the best shape of your life? And I was like, no, that's the thing. Not anywhere close. Like I had no business doing that run from a fitness standpoint. Like my feet were jacked up. My cardio wasn't there. My overall core strength, I had not worked out nearly enough. I was not really ready to do that. So as I'm running, now I'm in the second half of this thing. I didn't expect to see these three again. I thought I'd see them halfway and then I'd see them at the end because the course is set up and they tell you like, you can't have anyone run with you. If you have a support crew, they can only be at these couple of spots. And we hadn't talked about them being anywhere else. So I just figured once they had re-upped me and there were aid stations along the way, I was just like, okay, I'm going to see them at the end, but it's just me now. And all of a sudden, again, I'm coming around a curve. I'm all up in my head. Like I'm done. There's no way I'm going to make this. I'm fading fast. And out of nowhere, I just hear them again. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Oh my God, this is amazing. So I manage, right? Here I go. Well, then the end of it finishes in town. And as you come into town, if you've never experienced a marathon or a half marathon before, it is still crazy to me. The number of people that come out along the route and then at the finish, like the finish line is insane. And the thing that gets me is that there's way more people at the finish line cheering people on than there are for the number of runners that are there, right? Like, sure, 3 people were out there cheering for me. But even if there were 3 people for everybody that was in this race, given the fact that some of these people had finished literally 4 hours before I had, there's no way that all of these people are directly connected with somebody running the race. So there are people that are out here, like at the Philly Half Marathon and the New Jersey Marathon and all these different places. It's not the Boston Marathon. It's not the New York City Marathon. It's just some like thing in the middle of nowhere, Maryland. And it is 5 deep on either side. I'm like, what? It is crazy loud. So then like the last, I don't know what it is. Let's say it's the last, it's not a quarter of a mile. It's less than that. But you come down the main street and then you make a right in front of a middle school and that's where it ends. And I can hear the crowd like just getting all jacked up. And so then I do a full-on sprint, like everything I've got left in the tank. So then when I finish, I've missed my goal. I didn't make the 10 hours. I was just over. I finish, but then my immediate thought is, could I have sprinted longer than that? Like, could I have done more than like, so it was a really weird experience. On the one hand, going into the day, I had no expectations because I knew that I really hadn't done enough work for the goals that I wanted to achieve. But I also knew that I had nothing to lose. Like, so what? Who cares? Like, if I finish, I finish. If I don't finish, I guess maybe I'll try it again. That was my second thought when I got across the finish line. I'm never doing this again. Like, this is ridiculous. So yeah, it's a weird, like, in many ways, it kind of sums up who I am. Somebody gets an idea in my head, and I feel like that's a worthwhile or an interesting challenge. I'll go for it, even when there are moments where I realize that whatever the ultimate goal is, there's no chance I'm going to hit that, but I can still have some other goal. And so it's like this bargaining that I do with myself all the time of like, okay, well, you can't get all the things done today that you want to do, but are there 3 things that you can get done today, right? Like, so I had a list, right, of make it up the mountain and down the mountain was the number one thing on my list. Make it up the mountain and down the mountain. Finish in 10 hours. Don't walk through the finish line, right? Like I had a whole bunch of them. And I knew about 3/4 of the way into the race, I knew that the 10 hours, that goal was not going to happen. It was going to be close, but I would have to all of a sudden be running like 9-minute miles. And I hadn't run a 9-minute mile since like mile 3, right? Like there's no way I was going to start all of a sudden coming up. My legs were just burning and the pain was unbelievable. And then as it turned out, the last 3 or 4 miles of this thing are road run. And they're just this undulating, like nonstop. And so every time I started to go up, I would be cussing. And then as I was coming down, I would start running again. And then I would go up and then I'd start walking. And then I'd go down and I'd start running again. But I just kept setting all these different goals along the way. Like, okay, well, can you run for another 30 seconds? If you run for another minute and a half, then you can walk for 30 seconds. So it was wild. It was a great experience. There are like 9,000 different stories of things that happened during the run that were hysterical. I actually ran into a person that I had worked with years ago, who I knew ran these. She's an ultramarathoner. I remember when she ran this one the first time, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But I literally ran into her. Like I'm running down the hill and I was like, wait. And she was like, don't stop, go. And I was like, all right, keep going. And then she passed me later. And as she was passing me, she was like, hey, I'm not going to stop either. I'm like, yeah, go for it. But that kind of stuff, like it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Running is just a bizarre thing to me because I feel like I didn't get to it until I was well into my 30s, even my early 40s. Like the idea of, all right, I'm going to go out and run for 3 miles today just to do it. But it's become sort of the thing now. The reality is I've got to get my feet looked at all through wrestling season. It's been a problem, but so I haven't run. I have not run since that day. I got done with that day, not intentionally, but the 1 or 2 times I really tried to go out and do something, I could tell that my heels are there's a fatty tissue issue that I've got to have dealt with. But so, yeah.
Yeah. It's an incredible story. And I think as I'm hearing that, there's just so many questions popping in my mind. But I guess we could start with, I think the biggest question that anyone will have hearing a story like that is, how do you get through those moments where it's difficult? Well, and that could be whether in the training where he's like, I don't really feel like doing this anymore, in the run itself, like throughout the run, there's definitely hundreds of times where like, I don't want to do this anymore. And you mentioned yourself that there's times where you question, why am I doing this? And in the second part of your story, You did talk about how you make little goals for yourself, right? That, okay, can I get to the next 30 seconds? If I can run the next minute, can I walk for 30 seconds? So do you think that is the biggest driving force that allows you to overcome those difficult moments, or is there anything else you use to overcome that pain?
So for me, what I realized, and I hadn't ever thought about it before, but I started to think about it that day a lot because you're out for 9.5 or 10 hours, right? You get a lot of thinking done. There were two things. First and foremost, it was 3 people had taken time out of their lives to go watch me do this dumb thing. Like, the race was on a Saturday, right? But we had to leave here on a Friday. So like Gerber and Miller had to leave work early. Miss Miller's got 2 young girls, right? So she's got to make sure that somebody's watching them because they're not going to go. Like a 9-year-old does not want to go stand around on the side of it. Miss Salmon coming from the real world, doing really important, amazing work as an FBI special agent. Like this is a legit, you know, she's awe-inspiring to me. Every time I think about the transition she's made, and I'm jealous because I thought about doing it years ago and didn't. But the fact was they took time out of their lives and could have done anything on a Saturday. But here they were getting up at a ridiculous, like we do for wrestling, right? Like we were up and out of the hotel at 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m., something like that. And of course, the night before I had taken them into Mercersburg to see the old fire station that I volunteered at and meet all these people. And so they got to see all that sort of stuff. But while I'm doing this race, I just kept thinking about that. Like, oh my God, these people did this for me. How the hell could I quit now? Like they deserve to see me finish even more than I deserve to finish. Like if I quit, that's on me. But if I quit, I'm going to have to look at them and be like, you guys wasted this time. Like you could have done anything with this time. So a big part of it is, and I think this is true in any number of areas for me. Like, why do I do it? The Appalachian Trail hike is important to my buddy for a lot of different reasons. But one of them was that it had always been a life goal of his. And then he had this back surgery and he had this epiphany that if he doesn't do stuff now, like tomorrow's not guaranteed, right? We all know that, but then for a lot of people, something in your life has to happen where that really sinks in. And for this guy, it was this back surgery. He was like, I'm in my 30s. It's not going to get better. Like I've had the surgery, but time's ticking. So let's do this. So initially, even though I didn't really love it, the first hike, we had a good time, but it was painful. And we good? Yeah, all right. So I was like, I'm going to do this for him, right? It's important to him. So I'm going to do this for him. Then I gradually began to love it even more. And I think that happens a lot. Like I'm going to do this initially for somebody else, or even I'm going to do this because I just have to do it, right? Like I'm going to write that essay because I have to write that essay. But while writing the essay, you start to think, I don't kind of like this, right? Like I'm going to read this book because I have to read this book. And then 4 chapters in, you're like, this is a pretty good book now that I really get into it. That's a big thing for me. And then the little goals, that's the only way I can get through it, right? So the big one, like I'm going to do this for these people, that'll motivate me. But that's like a big high level motivation. How do I get up and over that next hill? How do I, find the energy to get through around that next curve, whatever? That's the little stuff. Like I just need to do that. Like that's it. I got 27 miles left to go, but I can't do 27 miles if I don't get over that next hill. So I'm going to get over that next hill. And if I get over that next hill, then I'll reevaluate. And even in a 3-mile run for me, as many miles as I've run, even in a 3-mile run, I will say to him, I can tell you exactly. I can point to the spot by the soccer fields, the back soccer fields. I can point to the precise spot that is 1 mile from my front door because I've run that so often. But now it's like, okay, just get to 1 mile. Just get there. If you get there, then you can walk around the corner to the driveway where that utility shed place is. Like then once you walk there, now you can run from there down to the old lacrosse coach's house's driveway. That'll be 1.5. If you make it to 1.5, then you can turn around and walk back, and there's another driveway on the other side of the road. I make these deals. Well, what happens is as I get in better shape, now the 1 mile doesn't become the goal anymore, right? Even the first goal, unless I'm having a really shitty day. Like if I'm just having a really shitty day, whatever, everything hurts, it's just lethargic, whatever, then I'll drop back to those other goals, right? And at the end of the day, the thing that I have learned above all else is that if you set a goal and you get to that feeling of, I said I was going to do this and I did this, is amazing. And I think for so much of it, that's what it is. Like nobody can ever take away from me that while I finished dead ass middle of everybody that ran the race that day, there were like 1,100 people that ran that race. I finished dead ass middle. People in my age bracket, dead ass middle. Every criteria I can find of how I ran that day, dead middle, as mediocre as all can be. But I did it, and nobody I did it. I set a goal. I did it. Good for me. Like that feeling is part of it. Is set the big goal, and then the little ones are what help you get to that big one, because the feeling when you get to that big one is so amazing. So I think that's really what it is for me, those two things.
So you finished the race now, and you've been looking toward this date for a while. But now that you've finished the race, would you say you feel a sense of satisfaction that you've completed it, or do you still feel as if there's something more that needs to be done?
So it's a great question, because the satisfaction, 100%, 100%. Like there's just, there's all these guys out there, Cam Hanes and Goggins and Joe Rogan and all these guys that talk about these things all the time. But even on a much less machismo level, in the Nike Run app, when you get done with a run, there's some professional coach that comes on, and the message is some version of, "Hey, good job today, man. Like you did something today that the vast majority of people didn't do today. Like you found a way to get up and go get your run on. Good for you." And the 50 miler is like that. Not everybody on a Saturday in November got up and did anything, right? Like there's a whole bunch of people that just sort of did nothing. In some cases, because they can't, right? I can. So why wouldn't I? It was a dumb challenge, sure, but I can do it. So, and I won't always be able to do it. And I wasn't always able to do it, but I can do it right now. So why not go do it? Yeah, there's always another thing. My biggest problem is figuring out what the next thing is, right? So, Miss Miller and I have talked about, well, she bought me as a gift. She bought us as a gift. We're going to run the Philly Love Run half marathon, which is in April, I think. We're going to go do that. That's a great goal. Now, it's going to be interesting. We haven't talked about it. Like, how are we going to run it? Like, are we going to run it at her pace, my pace? Are we going to set a same goal, right? Like, do we both want to finish in under 2 hours? Am I going to pace her? Is she going to pace me? Like, how's that going to work? Or are we just going to, high five each other at the starting line and then run like hell, and whoever finishes first is waiting with the free beer at the finish line for the other one? Like, I don't know. But yeah, there's always another goal for me. Right now I fall in this mode because now it's February going into March. Now I start thinking about, my hike is in July. This year is from New Hampshire into Maine. We're a couple of years from being done with this trail. This year we will cover what is routinely called the hardest mile on the trail. It's a rock scramble, essentially. Like there's not much trail. It's just hand over hand climbing rocks with a 25-pound, 30-pound pack on your back. So I'm looking forward to that. So now it's training for that. The half marathon will be one of the steps. Like that'll be a good measure for me. Like, where am I in April? What do I still need to work on? This year, I'll probably spend some more time on core stuff and overall muscular fitness, and a little less emphasis on cardio. I'll probably spend as much time on it. But yeah, there's always something else. And the satisfaction will always be there that I said I was going to do it. And part of it in that particular case is I said I was going to do it, and I really didn't think going into it that I was ready to do it, but I still did it anyway, which is another one. It's like we talk about that in the wrestling room all the time. Like, you can do more than you think you can. Like, you've got one more sprint in you. You've got one more push-up in you. You've got one more stand-up in you. Like, there's one more in you. It's tough sometimes to believe that, but it's there. And that 50 miler for me was that of like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I'm just not ready for it. I did not do all the things I should have done to get ready for this, but I did it. So yeah, it's a huge satisfaction thing.
One of the things I admire a lot about you is that you spend a lot of time doing epic shit, as I'll describe it. And I know that you mentioned that you try to stay involved in things and try to find new things to do. And you mentioned that when you find a proficiency in some activity, you tend to lose interest in it. Would you say you've always had this nature in you from when you're growing up, that you always like to do cool things, you like to try new things, challenge yourself, or do you think you developed it later on? And if you have developed it later on, what do you think really drove you to develop that kind of lifestyle?
So I have always, as long as I can remember, been a person who keeps busy. So my high school band director wrote a letter of recommendation for me. And for reasons I now don't really understand, because for the most part, when you write a letter of recommendation to somebody, you send it directly to the school. You don't give it. But anyway, he gave it to me. And I read it. And I'll never forget that the thing he emphasized the most in the letter was that he was amazed that I could do all the things I did simultaneously. And I'd never thought about it in that way before, but it's true. That's what I do. Like, I love doing so many different things, and I'm unwilling to not do that. So when I was in high school, I was playing soccer. I was in the marching band. I was in all the bands. I was in the theater productions, and I was a average student in above average classes, right? I never thought I was smart. Like, it never occurred to me that I was, despite being in all of the AP classes that my school offered, despite, being surrounded by people who I thought were really smart, and I was in all the same class. It never occurred to me that I was smart. Like, that was not the thing. It was just, oh, this is where I belong. This is where they place me. So this is what I'll do. I was not a particularly, I didn't think I was a competent soccer player. I didn't ever think any college would look at me. It never occurred to me until a college did reach out to me. And even then I was kind of frustrated with things that had gone on. So I didn't really, and they were a small Division III school. I was like, whatever, you guys aren't really interested in me playing soccer. So that has always been a part of my personality of, if somebody says, hey, do you want to do this thing? Yeah. Yeah. What's that thing? I don't care. I'll go do that. But I also have this tendency, and like, that cuts both ways. So once I've done something for a really long time, and one of the odd examples, I was thinking about this morning, is you've heard, I don't know if maybe you haven't, but Connor Becker and I at wrestling tournaments, we're all sitting there on our phone doing the New York Times puzzles. And what will happen shortly is that once I've come up with, in my mind, the algorithm to solve this thing easily or repeatedly, efficiently, I'll stop doing it. Right. So I play Sudoku like crazy, love Sudoku. But then I found killer Sudoku, which is a more intense version of Sudoku. And you need to use a slightly different like algorithm to get but once I get it, then I'll delete the game off my phone because yeah, whatever. I got it. Now that's neat. I figured it out. Okay. I figured out what's behind the curtain. Now I'll move on to something else. And that's true with so many other things too, that I will, once I really dig into it and I feel like, okay, I've done enough for this that I don't have to do it anymore, I'll put it away. But there are enough things in my life that I never get to that point. So, with firefighting, there's never been a time where I feel like, oh yeah, I've got this all figured out. Like that's never going to happen. And there's the community service aspect of that just feels like I'm doing something good. Wrestling is one of those things that has popped onto my radar of like, wow, like there's so much to this, so much more than people give it credit for. Refereeing soccer. Every year there's something else that comes up, something different, some nuance to it that challenges me. So I keep coming back to it. But once I feel like a thing's not challenging me anymore, I just, all right, I'm out. I don't really love easy stuff. I think it's why ultimately when I transitioned from being a full-time math teacher to a full-time tech person, that's what it was. Like teaching algebra 2 or calculus over and over again every year, I started to fall into what I would consider some bad habits of like, oh, well, I'll just do this the way I did it last year because it seemed to work. Yeah, I might make a little tweak here or there, but largely, Pythagorean theorem hasn't changed. Factoring polynomials hasn't changed. The challenge of relearning that for me, it didn't hold as much as what it does for tech. And you asked where I got that from. I think the reality is I saw that with my parents in a lot of ways. Both my parents in their own way, my mom didn't graduate college until she was 32. So I was very young, but I remember her still coming home from work, going to a small local college and being at home doing homework with me and my brother, right? All three of us doing homework. My dad worked afternoon shift. My dad, once I was starting to come up in soccer and playing a lot of soccer, he started playing adult league soccer, which as a 16-year-old was hysterical to watch, like these 40-year-old men running around the field, some of them who had never played soccer before, my dad included. And he adopted that and he started doing that. He had a friend that was big into sailing. So I learned to sail from my dad. And, it was like there were all these other things they did outside of just their job, outside of just raising a family. And so I think there's always been sort of an attraction to what else can you do today? They both do a bunch of community service stuff. And so giving back in whatever way you can, so that's part of it of like, and whether it's epic or not, I don't know that I don't do anything that I don't think is going to be a hoot, right? Like, oh, this will be a good time. Let's try this. And then I try it. And most of the time, once I've tried it, I got to keep doing it till I get to a point where I'm like, okay, either this is challenging and I'm never going to get rid of it, or, oh, this is pretty cool, but I feel like I've done enough of this to say that I've done it and now I'm going to move on. So, yeah.
Let's go back to the Appalachian Trail because I love hiking, but I can't say I've done anything crazy yet with hiking. Family and I, we've done day hikes before, but recently I've been thinking about going more into it and doing longer form hikes as well. I guess you mentioned that it's grueling, but also amazing. And when I hear the word grueling, the question comes to my mind is like, what part of it's the most grueling, right? Because is it the fact that you have to keep going for an extended period of time that kind of kills you with your cardio? Is it the fact that you have to carry so much stuff with you that's the hardest part? Or is it just the trails themselves are like hard to navigate? When you say that it's a difficult thing, what do you think is like the most difficult part of those extended hikes? Because I feel like in day hikes, it doesn't get that bad, right? You're not really carrying much stuff. It's not this extended period of time. So which of the factors do you think has been the hardest part of those hikes?
Um, that's it's fascinating. It's all of that. So like so many other, so the way we do it, and this is a big part of it. So we consider ourselves long section hikers. So there are section hikers, there are day hikers, there are through hikers. We're long section hikers because we're going to go do 120 some miles. But the way that we do it is we both meet up. So he comes in from Michigan, I come in from wherever, and we meet up. And we leave a car at the northern point where we're going to finish. Then we get in and drive the other car down to the southern point. And then we make sure we've got all our stuff and we start walking. So on a 7-day hike, like once you're 2 or 3 days into it, like you're half as far away from one car as the other. So, well, the weather's shit, right? I got blisters this year that I've never had before. I forgot some convenience item that I usually carry, and I'm just miserable without it. Okay, what are you going to do? It's the Appalachian Trail, like you're on the middle of wherever. Could you walk sideways and get to a town? Could you go to the next road stop, get to a town, find a ride, and go back to your car? Yeah, you probably could. Or, you know what you could do? Just suck it up, Nancy, and keep walking. Like you're going to get to the other car eventually. So the physical part of it, there's no getting around that. There are sections of that trail that just putting one foot in front of the other and constantly climbing up to then climb back down, to then climb back up, to then climb. Like it's just this repetitive grind. And once you've committed to it, unlike a day hike, right? I'm going to go to bed. Well, not to bed, right? I'm going to go lay on, we tend to use shelters all the time. I'm going to go lay on an air mattress in a 3-sided shelter. I'm going to get a half-ass sort of sleep. And I'm going to get up at 7 in the morning and I'm going to do it all again. And I'm going to eat foods that are not bad. They're not great, right? Like nobody's got a steak waiting for me. You know, there's, could I have a hot breakfast? Sure. If I wanted to spend the time boiling water and making, but we don't do that because that's just that much more stuff and more complex. And so you have Pop-Tarts and Cliff Bars and, you know, ramen and that, and yeah. And you're carrying some, for us, we consider ourselves to be ultralight hikers. Like we do ridiculous things. We rarely carry a tent. We're relying on the shelters to either be open for 2 more people or the weather to be nice enough that we do carry a tarp, that we can throw a tarp over a rope and sort of cowboy camp. So the physical part of it is brutal. The weather, last year we did the Whites. The White Mountains are unbelievable. The presidential mountains are, I have 6 or 8 pictures of me and my buddy standing at the peak of a mountain and you can't see 10 feet because it's all socked in with clouds and everything else.
Do you think we can connect to that and pull some of the pictures up? Or
Yeah, we might be able to. Yeah.
have you used this before?
I've used the TV before. I wonder, you know, it would be an interesting. So if I go.
So I've heard you played the trombone for 3 presidents. How did that happen?
So at least 3 presidents. my high school marching band in Sterling Heights, Michigan, so Sterling Heights, Stevenson, in 1988, as Reagan was ending his second term and George H.W. Bush was campaigning, Ronald Reagan did a campaign stop at our high school in the football field. And I was in the marching band. And so the marching band played Hail to the Chief, which was, the whole thing was an experience. Like the Secret Service comes in, the Air Force band director comes in and teaches us the correct way to play Hail to the Chief, like the exact timing of it, all that sort of stuff. So we played for President Reagan. And then the band, because we essentially did any campaign stop that anybody made in the greater Metro Detroit area, we were at, and we played both Democratic and Republican campaign stops because we didn't care who won. We just wanted to march in the inauguration. So in the inauguration parade, every state is represented. And we, our marching band, were the representatives for the state of Michigan, which meant that we got to play for George H.W. Bush because obviously he was being inaugurated, so he was standing there. And in the booth at the time that H.W. was being inaugurated was obviously his son, George W. Bush, who would later become president. So I played trombone for those three. Now, what we don't know is there's a fair likelihood that at one of these different events, or certainly the inauguration, Bill Clinton, as at the time governor of Arkansas, may have been somewhere in the vicinity. Was a young Barack Obama somewhere in the vicinity? Like, I mean, at this point, I just realized the other day as I was thinking about this, I was like, hell, Trump could have been somewhere. Like, I don't know. Joe Biden certainly could have been around. So I know at least three presidents. And the beauty of it is, in all cases, out of sheer dumb luck, I happen to be positioned such that in both Reagan and Bush's cases, I was within about 8 feet of them. And at the time, it was an amazing experience. It was just great. They have no idea who I am. It doesn't matter, but it's a fact. I played trombone for at least three presidents.
Incredible. Let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah. So the road temperature was probably 75.
I mean, it's all right.
All right. So 75, 80 degrees. And by the time we got to the peak, the summit, it was 30 degrees and the wind was blowing easily 50 miles an hour. So if you can imagine, I mean, about 3/4 up the summit, you start to feel this temperature change. And so you're digging through your bag to find your winter puffy coat, your stocking cap, your gloves, all that sort of stuff. You get to the top and there's no view because it's all socked in with clouds. And yet you still get a sense of sort of the awesomeness of where you are and what's up there. And then you start heading back down. And then again, you get a quarter of the way down and you're peeling off layers and now you're strapping that stuff and now you're sweating again. So there's all this stuff that happens while you're going on there that you have to deal with. And at the end of the day, you just got to deal with it. And the similarities between that and any other endurance type sport, right? Including wrestling. Yeah. My ankle's a little wobbly right now. Like Jack Stewart this year, that match will go down in the lore of Peddie wrestling, right? He sprains his ankle during the first period and says between periods, hey, coach, I sprained my ankle, but I can still finish. And he wins the match. Like, yeah, because this sucks, but I'm already here. Like, I've got two choices. I can quit or I can just see what happens if I power through this thing. And I think we get a whole lot more out of ourselves when we make that split decision, that okay, I'm just going to go a little while longer. I'm going to see if I can get through another round. I'm going to see if I can get over the next summit. I'm going to whatever. And I know that in various years, either, yeah,
All right, you can keep going. We got these two.
okay, either one, any one of us that were hiking that year was ready to pack it in for one reason or another. But because the other guys weren't, that's enough for you to say, okay, well, I'll keep going, because if they can tough it out, I can tough it out. And there's a bit of ego that goes into all this, right? Like, I never want to be the guy who quits when everybody else is ready to continue on. It's part of the reason I continually go out and run these half marathons and marathons. And I always say afterwards, like, there's nothing more humbling than when you're running all out and you feel like you're really giving it your best, and somebody passes you and your brain does that thing where you look at them and you're like, really? That's who passed me? Like, their running form is all jacked up, or they're, wildly heavier than you are, or whatever it is, that you're just like, wow, I got to get better at this, because I don't want to be passed by that many people again, or that particular person. I ran I did a triathlon, a sprint triathlon. So don't get excited. It's the short one, right? Where you swim, I don't know, a couple 100 meters. I don't know how long it is. You bike 20 miles or something, and then you run a 5K. I wasn't the person who signed up for it. So Miss Miller signed up for it. She'd gotten a concussion. She was pretty much recovered. She was fully recovered from the concussion. But if you've ever seen the way they start a triathlon, where everybody goes running into the water and you're going to get bonked on the head. And so she was like, I just don't think that's a good idea. And I was like, I agree with you. That's a terrible idea. She's like, but I don't want to give up my spot. And like, I feel bad because I paid for it. And I was like, well, I'll do it. And she got an offer to be a lifeguard. So she still got to go. And in fact, she got like a gift card or something. She got paid to be a lifeguard. And I just took her spot. And I did it. But there was no, not really prepared for it. Probably should have done some more swimming training before I jumped in. But why not? Like, let's give it a go and see what happens. And then there was this part where I realized halfway through the thing, when I really didn't want to do it anymore, that I was wearing a bib that had somebody else's name on it. And again, I was like, well, if I quit, it's going to look like Emily Miller quit. And that's not fair to her, because she wouldn't have quit. She would have finished the thing. So now I got to go finish the thing. The other part was, there was another Peddie faculty member in it that year. I didn't know that ahead of time, but when we were in the starting corral, I kept seeing them behind me, and they were refusing to make eye contact with me. And I was like, oh my God, this is an ego thing. Like, that person does not want to finish behind me. And they've actually done full triathlons. Like, I know that person can do this. And so then I was like, well, all right, now I only have one goal today. So that was my for the day. There again, there it was. I have to do this because I've got Emily Miller's name on my chest, and I really don't want that person to be able to come up to me a week from now and be like, hey, I saw you finish that triathlon, 10 minutes behind me. I was like, all right, I got to go. I got to do this thing. And so I did. Emily Miller finished the race. And they had and all these things, I always have a person at the end who's like calling out, like, oh, here comes so-and-so from whatever. And as I came around, the woman is standing there at the table. And she goes, and here comes Emily Miller from Heightstown. And I looked over at her and smiled. And she's like, Emily looks like they're having a good time. Then I ran through. And then I did beat the other Peddie faculty member. So they have not spoken to me about it. They have never mentioned that they were there the same day I was.
Yeah, that camera's acting up. Yeah, that'll do its thing. When you've gone hiking in the Appalachians, has there ever been any dangerous encounters you've had, animals or any dangerous moments, whether like on the trail itself, whether for you or the people you're with?
The closest thing we've had to an animal encounter that was legitimately like, okay, we got to take a minute and think about this, was that so we've had a ton of non-dangerous interactions. Both of us have encountered bear, and in both of our cases, the bear was like, don't care, don't want anything to do with you. I'm just going to keep going on my way. I sat and had lunch on the side of the trail one year, like literally broke open everything, sat there and ate a full lunch, which involved like ripping open a tuna packet and rolling it in a tortilla and, eating up. And when I went to get up, I set my poles down. And as I went to stand up, I looked, and within a foot was a copperhead all coiled up, just sitting there. Had clearly been there the whole time I was. I never knew he was there. He clearly did not care that I was there. And I got up and walked away. Never made a sound. Okay. Until I actually started to walk away, and then I heard a little rattle. And he didn't really pick his head up. He just gave a little rattle to sort of let me know he was there, and I walked away. The only thing that we've had close to a touchy moment was another copperhead that, for whatever reason, he was sunning himself on a rock. And in this particular stretch of the trail, the rocks were about head height. And so we saw him from a little ways away, probably 5 or 6 yards away. And he's sitting there, but he's up, like he's rattling, he's upset. And we were like, okay, not walking by him, because like he's literally going to strike me in the face. So we took little rocks, and we're just standing there like throwing little rocks at him, which is one of the things you're supposed to do, because they'll scurry away. For the most part, they don't want any part of you. So we're just chucking rocks at him, and he wouldn't move. We're like, what do we do? We got to go. And he doesn't want to go. So I took my trekking pole and just sort of like put it right at him. And eventually, as we got really close to him, he decided he'd had enough and scurried off. That was the closest thing. My buddy threw a snake at me one time. He was walking ahead of me. It was one of the rare times that he was ahead of me. He was walking ahead of me, and all of a sudden I hear him give out this little like, yikes. And he takes his trekking pole and he put it between his legs and sort of flung backwards. And as he did this, I realized that a snake was now flying at me. And I was like, what the? And then in midair, I could tell that there's something, your brain does these things where it's like your brain sends a signal to you that something's not right, but you don't quite understand what it is. So I was like, immediately I got this sense of like, I'm in no danger. Something's not right, and I'm in no danger. And so I sort of stepped to the side, and the snake hit the ground, and I looked, and the snake had a mouse hanging out of its mouth, like just the butt end was still hanging out, and it was just trying to finish this thing off. And I was like, oh, well, it can't strike me. It's busy. Like, I'm in no danger from this snake. Now I get it. My brain knew it instantly, like, you're fine, man. That snake's not going to do you any harm. And my buddy was like, yeah, sorry about that. I was like, you can't throw a snake at somebody and just be like, yeah, my bad. But no, we haven't had anything remotely. We've had, even with humans, right? Everybody we've ever met on the trail has been fantastic. I can think of one time that we were in a shelter overnight with a I'll call him a kid because he was like 19, who clearly had some stuff going on in his life and may have ultimately been homeless and was using the trail as a, because people are super generous on the trail. So they'll give you stuff. They'll give you food. They'll give you gear. They'll give you whatever. And it was pretty clear that that's what he was doing, was he was getting enough to survive. But we had heard about him for a couple of days. People were like giving warnings, like there's this kid out here who's kind of off. So I never felt like I was in danger, but it was one of the only times on the trail that I've made sure that I slept with my wallet, because I was like, this kid is, if somebody leaves something laying around that's of value, he's definitely going to take it. Right. Because he needs it. Like there's something going on. But no, I'm more worried any given year that one of us is going to twist an ankle, jack up a knee, right? Like a physical injury is going to be the thing that causes us an issue on the trail. The wildlife along that section, because it's at the end of the day, it's still a pretty well-traveled section between day hikers, section hikers, and through hikers. Like that whole area of the trail is pretty well covered almost year round. So the wildlife know that as well. And for the most part, the wildlife wants nothing to do with us. So yeah, no good stories there.
It's about an hour in. I have a list of some of your biggest life lessons you've learned through running and hiking, coaching, wrestling, and all that you do. So we'll get through as many as we can. First one, nobody cares, work harder.
That's a Cameron Haynes one that I sent to Coach last year when I read Cam's book. So he's an amazing guy who does all these ridiculous things. What he's best known for is hunting, but he's also an endurance runner and all that sort of stuff. And when I read it, I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, it's totally true. Nobody cares. You have people that are close to you that care tremendously about you and always want the best for you. But the world as a whole just doesn't care, right? Like when you cut somebody off in traffic because you're thinking about 9,000 different things and you're trying to get somewhere and it's really important to you and all that is, the guy who you cut off does not care. Like, so what? Be better, drive better than that. Don't cut me off. Like yeah, you got stuff going on, but I don't care. I don't know you. That's true everywhere, even at a place. And I'm blessed because I work in education, which is the least cutthroat work environment that anyone could ever dream of. I'm in almost no danger of ever being fired, nor is anyone else at this plate. Like, you have to do something truly awful in education to be fired. You can be a pretty bad teacher and still have a career that lasts a while before anybody will really run you out of it. But even in this environment, nobody cares. Like, yeah, you don't feel well. Okay. You still got to show up to your classes. You still got to get the work done. Grades and comments are still going to be due. Like, get it done. So yeah, that mentality is one that I think more people would be well served to sort of keep in mind, that everybody's going through something. Everybody's going through something. And your something is no more or less important, hard than everybody else's something. So yeah, lean into people that love you and lean into people to get you through that moment. But the rest of the world doesn't care. So
Why do you think people are so inclined to make excuses for like why they can't do something, right? Because that's what the quote is really talking about, right? Don't make excuses, get the job done. Why do you think people tend to make excuses for why they can't do something?
because it's easier, right? It's always easier to, instead of saying, I didn't get this done because I didn't work hard enough. I didn't get this done because I didn't put enough effort in. I didn't get this done because I didn't do the groundwork. I didn't lay the foundation. It's just easier to say, I didn't get this done because my boss didn't give me the materials I needed. I didn't get this done because my coach didn't tell me how to get out of a headlock. I didn't, you know what I mean? It's just easier. At the end of the day, like electricity, the path of least resistance, right? It is easier to blame and to put it off on someone else than it is to look yourself in the mirror and say, I failed today at that thing.
I also, with blaming people, at first it feels like kind of like, okay, now it's like it's not my fault, it's someone else's fault for why I didn't achieve X. But I realized that when you blame people, it actually makes you feel worse in the long run because you're essentially giving someone else power over your life. And when I think about it in that way, that I blame someone for the reason why I'm miserable right now, all of a sudden the thought that he has power over my life, he has the control to be able to mean that I can't achieve my goal, just hearing that makes me feel as if like, wow, I don't want to feel as if I'm powerless. And I feel like recently I've thought more that I want to blame myself for everything in my life, whether it's my fault or not. Because even if it's not true, it gives me agency. And I think when you have agency, it's a lot easier to do something about it. Because even though in the moment you look in the mirror and you're like, wow, I failed today because of me and it sucks. The fact that you failed because of you means that you can change something about it as well in the long run.
Yeah. And that mentality of, we talk about this all the time, the things you can control and the things you can't control. So my son's a juvenile diabetic. He's had diabetes since he was 3.5. He can't control that he has diabetes, but he can control when he eats, what he doses for his insulin. He can control what he eats, when he eats, how he eats, right? He can control making sure that when his blood sugar starts to rise or his blood sugar starts to drop, what actions he takes after that moment. He can never control the fact that his pancreas is done. It's never coming back. That ship has sailed. That was a lesson for me too, in that same thing. Like I could blame genetics. I could blame, the virus that he got when he was an infant. I could blame all sorts of stuff. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the fact that he still has to I still have to, as a parent, be there to support him through that process. And you're right, that short-term gratification, right? It's true in so many different places, but blame is one of them. Like it just feels good in the short term right now to say, well, it wasn't my fault I was late to class. There was a car accident on the road and I couldn't get around it. You could have left the house 5 minutes earlier, right? You could have maybe tried to find an alternate path, right? Like there's so few times where you can legitimately say there was nothing I could have done to change that outcome. That does happen, but it happens far less. And I would argue in our society, the one thing that we do far too often is we point to the anomaly and we use that as the example of the way that stuff should happen, right? Well, Bill Gates dropped out of college, right? You can be super rich because Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and whoever, Michael Dell, like these guys, computer gurus, they didn't finish college. Well, they didn't finish college in part because this other thing had already taken off. Like, let's be clear. Had the other thing not taken off, they probably would have gone back and finished college. And you're not Bill Gates, right? Like, I don't know what to tell you. The number of pro athletes we look at and we overlook, right? We overlook all the hard work, all the behind the scenes that went on there. I have no love for Kobe Bryant as a human being. I have a number of issues with the way he's been painted because I remember early in his career the way he was actually living. But the one thing I will always give him credit for is he was absolutely the guy that was taking 10,000 shots in the gym every single day. He was a gym rat. Yeah, it looked easy on the court in the final product, but we overlooked all the work he put behind the scenes. Michael Jordan's the same way. Like Tiger Woods is the same way. Like all of that stuff. They could have blamed somebody else when something early on in their progression didn't go their way. But instead, they just went back to working harder. And I think that mentality would serve people way better than the victim blaming, to your point, like in every way or shape or form. If you just say, what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? And it could be something silly. It could be, I need to set my alarm 5 minutes earlier, right? I've now been late to this thing at the start of the day 3 times in 9 months, and always because of some other external factor. Like I did everything right every day, and 98% of the time it worked out, but that 2% bothers me. Well, if you want to fix that 2%, then fix it, right? Like maybe I just got to put 5 more minutes into the bank so that I can make sure that those things don't happen, or that they don't affect my ability to show up on time. So,
Yeah, going back to your Kobe Bryant example, I think when we look at successful people, it kind of gets confusing as in like, what do I have to do to achieve that success, right? And we looked at this, oh, there's all these nuanced factors that contribute to why he became successful and I didn't. But we'll just choose one nuanced factor and say, oh, that's the reason, that's what I have to do. The fact that he dropped out of college is somehow correlated with the fact that he became successful. When it's just so happens to be like, okay, they both happen to happen at the same time by coincidence. But I think the one thing that's true of all people who become successful, or at least like 99% of them, is they just put the work in,
yeah.
right? 10,000 hours, however long it takes. I think for anything you want to achieve, it just takes time. Just time going at it after and after and after, whether it's Kobe Bryant doing that 10,000 shots, or it's Bill Gates sitting in his room for 10,000 hours working on creating this thing. But yeah, let's go to the next one. The process matters has to be the focus, not the outcome.
Yeah, so you heard that a lot this year too. It's the same thing that we just talked about, right? The process of getting better has to come before the outcome. Right? You can't have Microsoft if Gates doesn't go through the process of all of these iterations of creating and failing and trying again and failing and trying again with a goal in mind. Like I have a goal. I want to develop this device that will be in every home that people will use to make their lives easier. If you want to be the best at anything, if you want to be good at anything, you can't just get to the good part. You have to do the process that leads to it. And I think for far too many of us, we focus on that end result, right? Like for me, I want to finish that 50 miler. Okay, that's fine. But in order to finish the 50 miler, I got to finish 25 miles. And before I can finish 25 miles, I got to finish 5. So what's the process to go through to get to that end goal? Because I can't just get to the end goal. I can't just show up in Boonesboro, Maryland at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning and be like, well, I'm here. Okay, now I'm at the finish line. Good for me. Like I've got to go through that process. And that process involves training. If my goal is really, like if it really meant the world to me to finish in 10 hours, then I had to train in such a way to be ready. And I knew I hadn't done that. But I still kept that as a goal. Even if it was likely an unachievable goal, I'm still going to aim for it. If I come up short, all right, I come up short, but my other goals of finishing are still going to get met. I think when we do little things like, I want to get an A on this test. Okay. If that's your goal, what's the process to get to that A? We got to focus on that process. We got to focus on what kinds of things are going to go into leading to that outcome. Don't worry about the outcome. The outcome should just be, I want to do well. I want to know this material. So if we focus on that process of knowing the material, test will be easy because we know the material. So the process of taking notes every day, the process of asking good questions in class, of being focused on whatever information is being given to you, that's the process. And if we do that, the end will be easy. And recognizing that the outcomes oftentimes are the one part of so many things in life that are just beyond your control. The national qualifiers this year, we only get 2 spots, right? We've always gotten 3 before. We only get 2. So the ability to qualify this year was an outcome that was drastically changed and way out of our control. How many of our guys under the same scenario last year would have qualified? Maybe none. Maybe it would have been exactly the same because there would have been another school in the mix, whatever. But the process of getting there, that's the part you can control. That's the part you can work on. Whether or not a college accepts you, that's the outcome. And if you've done everything you can do, the outcome will come or it won't. But you can't focus on that. That can't be the thing that because there's no way to do it. Like that, I think that's the part of it that I wish I could get more students to understand is that the outcome, the actual end result, is completely out of your control in most situations. The process leading up to that outcome is the only part you control. Because so much of what happens at that outcome is a vote, is a random draw, is a selection of some sort. Even in athletic contests, you've done everything. You've prepared to play your best game. But you can't control what your teammate's going to do. You can't control what the other team's going to do. You can't control what the referee's going to do. You can only control what brought you to that moment, that all of that, the steps that you put in. The outcome will happen. So I want for me, and this is as much, like I say so many things in the wrestling room to you guys, what I'm really saying is to myself out loud, you guys just happen to be in the room, right? Like, I really want this thing to happen, so I better do all of these steps to make it more feasible, more likely that it'll happen.
I think in addition to the fact that we literally cannot control the outcome, I think the focus on the process of the outcome also connects to the fulfillment that we derive from something in the first place, right? And I think a lot of people have misconceptions about how do you actually derive fulfillment? How do you actually feel a sense of happiness? And I think a lot of people believe that the outcome itself is what gives you that happiness, whether it be like I finally made $1 million, or I finally became the #1 wrestler, or I finally, I don't know, finished the 50-mile run first place. But I think that I've spoken to a lot of people that have mentioned that the glory, like, sure, it lasts, it feels good, but it doesn't last for long.
Right.
And it's not as if that, okay, I finally achieved X goal, I'll be happy for the next 20 years of my life. And because of that, you really need to have a process that you enjoy as well, in addition to just focusing on the outcome, right? Because if you focus entirely on the outcome and you say that, okay, for the next 6 months, I'm going to sacrifice my happiness so I can achieve the outcome and then I'll be happy. Well, the outcome, the joy of the outcome will last for 10 days, but the misery for 6 months is going to last for 6 months. And that's not to say not to do anything difficult, because I think you can enjoy things that are difficult. But for you, for example, you enjoyed running.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it was like a therapeutical thing for you, that if you didn't run, it's like your life was so much worse, and that you compare the time when you're running to when you're not running, you could see the drastic impact on your life, whether it's your focus or it's your ability to feel happy and fulfilled, and maybe even go to bed with a smile on your face, right? Because of you have that peace in your life. And I think everyone has their own thing that brings them that fulfillment. Like for me, for example, I think wrestling correlates exactly with the story you described with running, where, I've been on and off with wrestling. Sophomore year, I started wrestling. Then I didn't wrestle in the offseason. Then I wrestled again in junior year and I felt amazing again. And then after the season ended last year, for about a month or so, I decided not to wrestle because I was focusing on lifting and bulking and getting size. And since I didn't lift for that time, I realized that, wow, life kind of really sucks now. I was just having so much fun in season, and all of a sudden, like, I'm having headaches during the day. I don't feel as mentally relaxed or mentally peaceful. And then in spring, I started, okay, let's wrestle again. Then I started going to elite, and all of a sudden, back over there, I feel happy. I feel fulfilled. And then over the summer, when I'm in New Hampshire doing my EXP lab, all of a sudden, I don't have the time to be going to a club. And then again, I'm like not feeling great again. But then in the fall term, I'm wrestling again. And I've noticed that the on and off switch between whether I'm wrestling or I'm not wrestling is directly correlated with the fulfillment I feel. And sure, the outcome is great. Let's say I kept wrestling for the next 10 years and I became #1 at some competition and I won something. And sure, that outcome would feel good. But I think the outcome is useful so that you know where you're going. But at the end of the day, like, the process itself is what you spend all your time doing. So you really need to find a process that fulfills you and you enjoy the most.
Yeah, there's no doubt the day to day, and it's true for me in so many different avenues. Like, what's the outcome of being the director of technology at a boarding school? Like, what the outcome is someday I retire. It's the day to day of, okay, I'm making things easier, more efficient for teachers and administrators and students to be able to do the things that they want to do in their classrooms and in their offices. It's solving problems that come to me that I've never seen before. Like that process, that brings me real joy. Like, finishing the 50-miler felt awesome. And you're right, it lasted a good stretch. Like, there was a dopamine rush for days. That dopamine rush also happens when somebody walks in here with a computer there's an issue. Wow, I've never seen that before. and then getting to how that, and then coming out, and then the outcome, right? Like, oh, I fixed it. That feels amazing. But it feels amazing until the next time somebody comes to me with, like, there's that thing. The same thing is true in the classroom, right? Like getting with the process of teaching and then having a kid say, I finally get it. Yes, that's why we do this, for those outcomes. But if I don't do the process, I don't get that outcome. So I got to do the process. Working with you guys in the wrestling room and half-ass coaching you up, like when a parent comes to Coach Frank and I at the end of a season and says, we got to tell you, like, we hear about you all the time. Our kid thinks that that's awesome. I love that feeling, but that feeling can't happen if we're not in the room every day, putting the work in to make those connections and to build those bonds. That's it. It really does keep coming back to that for me, that, to your point, the outcome feels great, but it only feels great because of the work that I put in to get there. If I don't ever put the work in, I can't get to the outcome. So it won't matter. And I'll never get that feeling. So I got to get that feeling. And enjoying the process. Yeah, I think you have to enjoy the process. Although I also think that there are times where you have to recognize that if you really want whatever that outcome is, there are going to be days where the process itself is just going to suck. And nobody cares. Work harder, right? Like, there are many days I walk in here to the office and I'm just banging my head against a wall, not making any progress whatsoever. Nobody cares, right? Like, I still have to keep grinding away until I get over that hump, whatever that hump is. Athletically, that's certainly the case, right? The number of times that you're just like, man, I cannot get this. I cannot get this. Well, keep working, because eventually you're either going to get it, or you're going to find a way around it, or you're never going to get to that outcome. So you got to keep grinding away at it.
Regret sucks.
I finished my first half marathon in 2 hours and 7 minutes. And I, again, had a goal and I didn't meet that goal. And it's like, I could have pushed harder. Like, I can think of various times during that run where I could have pushed harder, where I was messing up. I got mad because my tunes stopped playing, right? Like, Amazon Music let me down. And I actually stopped and walked to fix that problem. And I got done with the race and I was like, how much time did you waste messing around with whether or not Beyonce was playing? Like, this is dumb. Like, I've made choices in my life where I look back and I'm like, man, what if I had done that differently? I should have pushed harder. I should have, once you take the easy way out, you don't take the chance, you don't take the risk. You'll never look back after we were talking about this a little bit last week in the room. When you quit something, I can't imagine a scenario where you look back 5 or 10 years later, unless it's something dangerous, right? Like you quit smoking, great. But what we were talking about specifically last week was seniors and senior spring. Well, I'm not going to row. I'm not going to do crew because it's my senior year and I want to enjoy the spring. 5 years, 10 years from now, are you really going to look back and go, man, I'm so glad that I did nothing my spring term and I got in one more round of, Frisbee or what? Like, what are you talking about? You're never going to look back and be like, oh, I'm so glad I quit this. I have a few of those moments where I look back and I'm like, why did I stop doing that? Like, I didn't become better off because I quit that. I didn't become better off because I ended that relationship over something stupid. Like, it doesn't go away. Like, it every so often it just churns back into your head. You're like, why did we do that? And you can't go back and redo it. Like, there's no do-overs. So I think that's been my biggest thing is before I decide not to do something again, before I decide that, okay, I'm going to move on from this thing to this other thing, I have to have that hard conversation with myself of, am I going to look back and say, man, I wish I would have kept doing that? Is there any chance that I'm going to look back and say, boy, I'm really glad I quit that when I quit that? And maybe there are, right? When I made the choice to leave Mercersburg and come here, it was a big choice. I thought at the time that some things were going to happen at that school that I wasn't ready. I didn't want to have to suffer through it. 5 years later, all of that stuff had happened, and I got to look back and say, man, I'm glad I got out of that when I did, because I wouldn't have wanted to be there for all of that. So yeah, regret sucks because it never goes away. I think it's one of the few things that your brain just holds on to over and over again. So before you make a decision, especially about quitting something, you have to know that you're quitting it for the right reasons, because later on, that regret, there's nothing you can do about it. And all of that time that you lost getting better at that thing, unrecoverable.
I feel like regret is inevitable no matter what you end up doing. Because let's say you have two choices in life. Do I want to move to Houston or do I want to move to Michigan? If you decide to move to Houston, you're always going to regret in your mind, what if I went to Michigan? And if you went to Michigan, you're always going to be like, what if I went to Houston? And obviously that's one example, but I think anytime you're making a decision, there's going to be some regret about the other decision. So the real question is, which regret do you want to live with? Because if you accept the fact that you're going to feel regret, because it's just a human thing that no matter what you do in life, it's impossible to minimize regret, right? I guess in times in the past, I felt as if regret is something that we should like minimize, but you can't really change how much regret you feel. I feel as if that you can only change like what you regret. And if you're making a decision like my senior spring, let's say I quit crew versus let's say I decided to keep doing crew and then finish my season, right? 10 years from now, will I regret the fact that I decided to continue crew, or will I regret the fact that I quit crew, right? And you play those out in your mind and you put yourself in the future and look back at yourself, and then you'll be able to feel like you can kind of get an idea what the regret will feel like. And then you can make a decision based on that. Because I think sometimes decisions are hard because there are so many nuanced factors and there's so many things to consider. And it's hard to picture an idealized life that if I had both of the outcomes, which outcome would I like better? But sometimes looking at it in a negative view, like which one would I regret more and which regret could I absolutely not live with? Go with that. And sometimes I have like desires that I want to start my own business, right? I want to start my own project. And I think this is an example of a project I want to start, right? But there's so many reasons why it won't work, right? There's so many reasons that like it may never become successful. I may never end up making money off of it. It may completely fail. So should I just completely not work on it at all? And should I just focus my time on getting my degree and getting a good job? Well, sure, I could. It'd be a safer decision, but which decision would I regret more? Would I regret the fact that I never tried it in the first place? I'll always think in my mind, even if I'm going to work a normal job, I'd always think that, what if I actually tried it and it actually worked? Or would I regret the fact that I tried it and it failed? At least then I can live with that regret more than the other regret.
So there's a great distinction there. But I mean, first, if your choice is Michigan or Houston, it's got to be Michigan. That's a no-brainer. There's a difference between, for me, it is the regret of things that I didn't do, right? And your example is a good one. There's a difference between I made a choice, like I've got to do one thing or the other, so I got to make a choice. For me, if I've done the list of pros and cons and I've come up with, okay, this is the choice I'm going to make. That one, there will be no regret for me later on. Because, and again, to your point, you're exactly right. All right, so I go to Houston and things don't go well. I should have gone to Detroit. There's no guarantee that Detroit was going to be better. Detroit might have even been worse, right? And that's my thing so often with like college acceptances. Well, I really want to get into this school, but I got into this school, and then I go to this school and it's not as great. That's because I didn't. No, you have no guarantee that. And there was a woman I just saw on an Instagram reel that was like, you get accepted to Harvard and Yale. You go to Harvard and it doesn't go well. Oh, I should have gone to Yale. Why? Like, what makes you think it would have been any better at Yale than it was at Harvard? And or for that matter, the University of Michigan or Mercer County Community College. Like there's no guarantee that the path you chose was better. So my thing with regret is when you got to that decision, had you gone through all of the steps to really make that decision? Or, and this is where the regret comes in for me, did you just do it because it was the easiest one? That's the one to me that I look back on later on and I'm like, that's the regret I can't live with. That's the regret that sucks. The examples you've given are all for me choices. And yeah, you're right. In those cases, okay, do I go take a shot at this thing? It's a flyer, but if I don't take this shot, and that for me, right? So I had a chance, I had a choice to take the safe route of going to college, or at the time, the much less safe route of going into the military. I chose the college route. I regret that I didn't take that flyer, that I didn't try it. And every once in a while it comes up and I'm like, man, I really wonder what would have happened had I taken that chance. I could have still gone to college after the fact, right? I still could have, and maybe would have ended up in exactly the same place, but I would have gotten this other experience that I now no longer can have, right? Firefighting's different. I never thought of anything to do with firefighting until it was well beyond the point where because of age, where I could have become a professional firefighter, a paid firefighter. So I have no regret in that regard. I just didn't know it existed. I didn't know the possibility was there until it was too late. No regret. But with the military and a few other things in my life, I did make a choice and I chose the easier path. And for me, all of those cases that I look back on and I say the decision was just about taking the easier path, I have regret, and that regret sucks. I now, looking back, would say if I'm ever forced with a decision, and one's a little bit risky is not maybe the right word, but one of them is a little more daring, I want to go with that daring one. I don't ever want to look back and say, I didn't do it because I was afraid of taking that risk. So,
Yeah, sometimes I feel regret as if I wish I started something sooner, right? But the thing is that there's no scenario where it was even possible for me to start it sooner, and some things like that you can't even regret something that wasn't possible.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think a frame that's helped me now is that the present moment is a second chance. That sure, I look back at the decision I made, or even the decision I did not make, that I did not choose to go into the thing that I wanted to do. Well, I can do it today.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess there's always this notion that it's too late, which obviously I'm young, so I can't say that I have experience with things like that. But I have a feeling as if that is it really ever too late to start something? Because sure, there might be like physical limitations, but I think even looking at your story, that you started running like you said your 30s, right? 40s. I mean, you still made it happen, right? So I don't know. I hope that I can hold on to that as I get older as well, that the present moment's a second chance. Like just go out and do what you want today. Anyways, next one. If it's your job to eat a frog in the morning, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat two frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. I've heard this one before, so let's talk about it.
So to your last point, yes, as you will find out, there are a few things that they draw age limits on. And so, yes, there are a few things where you're like, oh, I guess I can't do that anymore. But for the most part, there's no reason. And even with those things, that if you're really, and firefighting is another good example, departments all over the country have an age limit, 35 years old. They won't take anybody. A guy in Philadelphia was 37 years old, took it to court, won. They had to put him on the roster to at least go through the training, right? So there's very, very few of those things anymore, but there are still a few things that like, yeah, the ship has sailed. The Mark Twain quote is one that it has taken me a long time, like embarrassingly long time in my life to recognize that when I wake up in the morning and I think about the things I've got to do today, my day will go way, way better if I just decide that the first thing I will do is the thing I want to do the least, like the hardest, most boring, tedious, like the biggest lift of the day. If I just devote time to getting that one out of the way, the rest of the day is a cakewalk. And I think more and more, it keeps coming up. Like it's usually not nearly as bad as I think it's going to be. And the feeling of getting it done and knowing that it's done is just like, that's the best feeling. And so it's taken me a really, really long time to wrap my mind around that notion that Mark Twain was right. Like, if you have to do something that sucks, get it done first. And if you have two things that suck and one thing sucks even worse than the other, just get that one out of the way. And once you do, the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the rest of the month, they just go better. So, yeah.
I've always thought that time limits are what create anxiety. As if like if I have a presentation tomorrow, then I'm going to be really anxious about it. We want to avoid that kind of anxiety. Which is why the notion of pushing back a test, that I have another week to study for it. I have my presentation, I signed up for the last one, so I have the most time possible. I'll be the least anxious. I found that it's actually the inverse of that. That I feel less anxious if I have something to do tomorrow that's due tomorrow versus I'm given all the time in the world to finish something. I have until next week to study for it. Because you might think that, you have the time to do it, you'll deal with it later, but the anxiety is kind of or in your head building and it stays with you for the next week. Which is why that I think this year, in small moments, right, whenever we have a presentation or some sign up for something, I always sign up for the first one, right? And I get it done first. And then when people are still stressing for the presentation they're doing next week, I'm like, oh yeah, I finished that such a long time ago. It's like, I forgot it existed. And I think it connects to the point you're making now as well, right? Because if you have some big, difficult frog that's sitting in you throughout your day, and you're thinking about it all day that, you have to do that frog, I have to do that frog, I have to finish that task, I have to finish that task. Until you finish that task, your whole day will just be filled with this anxiety humming in the background of your mind. So I agree with it completely. I think it makes sense. I've also gone periods of time where I've tried to work in the morning also before school because I found that way I can just get it out of the way. And then my whole day is like so much more peaceful. I don't have to worry about the big nagging task of the day. So 100%.
That's for me, that's also true with working out. If I wake up and get a workout in, the rest of the day goes so much better because I feel like I've done one of the things that it's set my day up for greatness. There's a time management thing out there. It's called Getting Things Done. And I don't buy into it completely there because part of the logic is if a thing will take you less than 2 minutes to do, just do it. The problem is I have so many things in my day that will take me less than 2 minutes to do. But I could do that all day long. All day long, I could just do things that take me less than 2 minutes to do. The problem is I never get to the things that I need to spend a half an hour or an hour really getting on. There's a ton of research that backs up your notion, what you're talking about, a ton of research that backs it up. That when you have a big thing looming over you, letting it sit, you still are devoting mental energy to it. And that's what's making you tired. It's not all these other things you're getting done while letting this sit because you still have time for it, but it's weighing on you. And that weight is taking a toll. And so you are much better off saying, okay, I know my project's a week away, but today I've got to get done this thing for that project. And if you do that thing, then that weight goes away. Now I've done that. Okay. So I got to do an outline. There's my outline. Now that I'm done with that. So that notion of like, let's just get this thing done. Absolutely. There's a huge psychological effect of get it out of the way. And then now you can move on to the rest of the stuff, especially if that thing is a big target.
And I know this other thing is kind of cliche, but just taking the first step takes so much of the stress away because you have that essay to write and it's looming in your head and it's this big scary thing. And your brain makes it to be such a much more bigger thing than it actually is, right? And you write a page of it and you're like, oh, that's nothing. That's not that bad. And I believe that even if you have a project that's pretty far away, just at least getting it started, at least doing a pretty good portion of it now instead of waiting till the last minute. Even if you don't finish a lot of it, even if you write one page of a senior thesis that's 8 pages long, I found that since I wrote a page early on, I just wasn't stressed about it for like most of the time, even if I wrote a big portion of it afterwards, like later on near the due date, because your brain tends to make problems in your world to protect you. Obviously, it's a survival mechanism that wants to make sure that you're safe. So it alerts you that there's these problems in your world, but it tends to create these small things and make them so much bigger than they actually are.
So you just came full circle, right? Like, there we go. We just came full circle. you can't run the 50 miles without running the first mile, right? The JFK 50 miler, you can't finish, you don't get to run the flat part until you've gotten up and over the 1100-foot climb and descent. So like, how are we going to get all these big things done? Well, we got to do the first thing first. And once we get that first thing done, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, all right. Look at how far I am. This feels pretty good. Like that. Yeah, that's all. Life is so simple, right? Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep doing those little things. Keep doing that process. And then the outcome will happen, good or bad. But if you do the process, more often than not, the outcome is going to be the one you're looking for. So yeah, that's good stuff.
Next one. Serving others just feels good and the feeling lasts.
There's no getting around it. When you do something for the benefit of somebody else, feels better than every other thing you can do. Having a spa day for yourself feels great. Like there's no getting around that. Going and getting a massage and soaking in the tub and devoting a day to your own well-being feels great. But getting somebody through a tough time, being there to take the weight off of somebody by giving them a ride to the airport, showing up on an ambulance for the little old lady in the nursing home who isn't really, she doesn't need help. She doesn't need a medical thing. She's just lonely at 2 a.m. and just showing up and listening to her story for 10 or 20 minutes and then having her sign a form that says she doesn't need to go to the hospital and then wishing her well and walking out the door. I haven't done that as an EMT in well over 10 years, but that feeling of having done that a handful of times, that doesn't go away. Like I know that I did that. I know it was beneficial to that person. That feels good. And that doesn't go away. The spa day feeling goes away, right? Like there's just no getting around it. Oh, I bought myself this cool new thing and it feels pretty good to have it but that goes away. Buying that same thing and giving it to another person and seeing the look in their face, that feeling lasts way longer than the feeling of, I got it myself. And I can't, it's the only, like, refereeing soccer does not pay. I mean, it does, like they give you a check, but it doesn't, there's no profit in it. I'm not making any real money. I'm not buying anything other than more soccer crap by doing that. But the feeling I get knowing that those kids were served by having a half competent official at the game that day, that's beneficial. Like that feels good. Even when people are yelling and screaming at me, like later on, well, at least you had someone to yell and scream at. The fire department is obviously that, but it's not just the calls, right? Like keeping that organization running, helping to be a part of that, that process of making sure that this community is served by an all volunteer department, that taxpayers don't have to dip even deeper to pay for more resources because we can handle it. We got it. You'll be fine. That's a feeling that just never goes away. I will know that I've done my best by doing those sorts of things. Part of the reason I wanted to come out for wrestling in the first place was because Coach Frank and I had developed this relationship down at the fire station, and I could tell that he needed another set of eyes and ears and someone else to help drive the bus and, do that kind of, that was my soul. And when I first came in, the only thing I asked him was, could you use somebody else in the room just to help manage the kids? And then he was like, well, yeah, but you got to, like, coaches participate in wrestling. Like that's a thing. And so then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to treat this just like I'm a freshman at Peddie and I'm going to go for it. But the initial was not about coaching. It was about helping him. It was about giving some service back to a guy that I had come to admire. So That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do some service. And that part of it has never gone away. That feeling of, I think I did him a solid, and I think it's benefited him, and maybe it's benefited some students, and it's certainly benefited the school. That feels good. It'd feel even better if we would win more often, but it feels good just to do that part. So yeah.
Why do you think that piece, like it feels so good to help people, right? Because you mentioned that you can do things for yourself and it feels good, but it goes away. But there's something so different about our interactions with other people. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Is it the flip side of uh why blame doesn't feel good? Right? Like again, blame doesn't feel good because we're giving people power over ourselves. But when we provide service, we are literally giving part of us to someone else intentionally. Like I'm giving you part of me to help you, as opposed to I'm letting you have control over me, right? Like, is it just that simple? Is it just the flip side of the blame? I don't know, but I know it's true. Like, I don't think I know I've never thought about why does this feel so good, but I know for sure. And that age old adage of giving gifts is better than receiving gifts. And that's true, right? Like at a major holiday or a birthday party or whatever, when you hand something over and you see that momentary look in the other, hey, this feels good. I like this. Like, I don't know why that is. I just know it's true. So I'm going to keep doing it, which is selfish, I suppose, right? Like you could, he's only doing this because it makes himself feel good. Yeah, that's it.
I was actually talking with Mr. Dom, the new math teacher.
Mhm.
We were talking about that at the end of our last podcast last week, that if we do things for other people with the selfish intent that it kind of makes us feel good, is that a bad thing? And we end up going really deep into the discussion, like what even is the self? And I guess we came to a point that there's nothing you do in your life that's not in some way correlated with another person. And I guess just even looking from the evolutionary part of that, it's just that our strength in evolution was that we collaborated in tribes, right? And that all our dopamine circuits in our body are wired in a way that we feel as if we need a tribe to survive. And that can influence a lot of the things we do. But yeah, I mean, it's hard because I think you really go digging. A lot of things that you do for yourself in a day-to-day basis, have to realize that there are in some way correlated with other people. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, sure, it feels good for yourself to do things for other people, and that's a good thing for you, but it also makes them feel good. So why is something that makes us both feel good a bad thing just because it makes me feel a little good? Right. But yeah, next one. Own your mistakes.
This is where I get up on my soapbox all the time. I do not understand. I cannot relate when people won't just say, I messed up. It doesn't make any sense to me. I joke all the time that I'm really good at this because I make a lot of mistakes. So I have to all the time say to people, oh, sorry about that. Like in a math classroom where I'm doing a problem and we're like on step 12 and somebody will point up at step 2 and they'll be like, bro, you forgot to distribute the negative sign. And I'm like, oh my God. Yep, I did that. That's my fault. Hang on, let's go back. Let's just, I've had days where I've said something in a classroom that was completely wrong, right? Whatever. Like I remember early on in my teaching career, a kid asked a question and the conversation got sideways, and I became convinced of, I'll call them these Facebook problems where it's, lots of parentheses and exponents and addition and subtraction and all this stuff. And what's the correct order of operations? And I got myself sideways and I ended up saying the wrong thing. And it was 2 days later where I was like, wait a minute, that's not right. I don't have to say anything, right? Like it's move on. We're already beyond that. Nobody remembers that problem anyway. But it was a mistake and I made it in front of people that trust me to give them the right information. Like, okay, hold on, guys, we got to go back because I said something stupid in here the other day. And I need you to know that I said something stupid in here the other day. We have to admit when the fault is our own for all the reasons that you and I have talked about today about giving to others and about blame and all that other sort of stuff. If I've made a mistake and it affected somebody else, it's unfair for them to walk around asking themselves that question. What could I have done differently? What could I have done differently? Well, you couldn't have done anything differently because I was the one who messed up. Like, that's on me. You deserve for me to say what you're feeling right now isn't entirely your fault. I played a role in that. So again, it goes back to that giving of others. And I can't tolerate the fact that people won't stand up and say, that was on me. I messed that one up. And we see it in lots of places. And it drives me nuts when folks can't just admit you messed up. It's okay. It's okay. I say that all the time. Like, when I was a kid, we used to have accidents. People would have an accident. Oh, that was an accident. And they'd apologize for it. And that was it. When we have become this litigious society where everybody's going to file a lawsuit over this thing or that thing, the trickle down effect then is no one's allowed to say, I messed up, because, oh, you admit it. You messed up. Oh, well, then this is your fault. Now you're liable for it. There was no intent. And I think in some of the last 5 or 6 years, one of the things that people keep saying over and over again about different interactions is intent doesn't matter. Right? Intent doesn't matter. If you say a thing and it hurts my feelings, whether you intended to hurt my feelings doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Of course it matters, right? Like, if I intentionally drive my car into a crowd of people, like, I need to be held accountable. But if I hit my brakes as I was coming to an intersection and I just hit them a little too late and I hit your car, and then other things happen, the intent does absolutely matter. I didn't intend to harm anyone. I messed up. I made a mistake. I need to be held accountable for the mistake, but not to the same degree that as if I intended to do it, right? And when people don't own up to their mistakes, that then causes me to ask that question. Well, did they intend to do it? Because if they admit they did it, like, right away, that notion that they intended to starts to fall by the wayside. Like, well, clearly they didn't intend to do it because they're standing up here telling us that they messed up. If they'd intended to mess up, they probably would try to hide it, right? Like, so to me, when you don't own up to your mistakes, that causes me to wonder about your motives. What were you doing? Why won't you just admit, like, oh yeah, I messed up. I should have done this, but I didn't. So, yeah.
I think I was in middle school, maybe fifth or sixth grade. My family and I, we were going paddle boarding somewhere. It was like this big lake by a mountain. It was really nice, and we were doing paddle boarding. We had a tour guide with us as well, and my mom was always lagging behind us. And I mean, we're all like pretty healthy and everything, but she always seemed to be like trying to catch up. She was a little bit further behind, and we're like, we don't know what's happening. We're just like laughing at her, like joking. Oh, she's trying to catch up. And afterwards, we finish up. We give back the tour guide his paddle boards, and we're going to sit our car. And the paddleboard guy comes up to us and says, "I'm sorry, but hers was broken." And you have the interaction, and it's not like we hate him for it.
Right.
You're not gonna go up to him and be like, "Oh, why would you do this?" We're not gonna start getting angry at him. We respect him more that he actually admitted his mistake. But for some reason, I feel this in myself, and I think a lot of people feel that if we admit our mistake, there's a fear that people will hate us.
Yeah.
And I felt that too. I think there's been times where I've realized, shit, I fucked up, but I'm kind of scared to go and tell them I messed up because I'm scared that they're gonna hate me for it. But on the flip side, when other people go and admit their mistakes so they don't have to, our respect for them increases, which is like this weird dichotomy because our perception of what other people think about us is sometimes completely wrong, and in a certain scenario like that. So I do think that I'm gonna definitely make that as an effort for myself because I do think I try to, but in times I can look back at the past at times where I haven't admitted my mistake when I've caused that harm. And I think that that's something I want to do better at. I want to make sure that not only like, I think there's a few things that I want to get better at, and one of them is owning up to my mistakes, but I think it encompasses this larger theme of never lying. And it connects to your next point as well, kind of being honesty with oneself. Because I think honesty is a very important thing as well, where if you're lying, it's probably because you're hiding from something, right? You're hiding from some consequence or factor in the real world. And sometimes I'll lie to get away with something, whether it's with someone else, but sometimes I lie to myself as well. And I know that there have been times in the past where my actions don't reflect my inner thoughts, which is probably one of the worst feelings you can have. Yeah. But yeah, what are your thoughts on honesty?
So I have one story that kind of encompasses all of that. So I know that I have an ego that rivals, like I believe firmly in myself. I know who I am, and I believe I'm capable of anything all the time. I actually think I'm a pretty good referee. Like I think I'm really good. I know the rule book inside and out. I know multiple rule books inside and out. I know where I should be on the field. I know how to gauge the temperature of a game. I know all these things. I'm really good. And I know I'm really good because I've only been in this area for a couple of years, few years, and the high school assigners give me the really big games. So I know I'm good. Last year, Notre Dame is at Princeton High. And there are two referees, and I'm the guy near the penalty area. And my partner's back here, and we have headsets on so we can communicate. And there's a lot of action in the penalty area, and he says over the headset, that's a foul, that's a foul, that's a foul. You got a PK. I don't really see what he saw, but that's why there's two of us on the field. I blow my whistle, award the PK. And over the radio, he says, 16 tripped, 18. All right, I got it. Goalie's yelling, screaming. I'm like, hey. I'm like, we both got a trip. We both got a trip. 16 clipped his feet. It's a trip. It's in the box. It is what it is. But I don't really believe it. Like I just didn't see it that way. But he also had a very different angle. So whatever, always trust your partner. And if the roles were reversed, I would wanted him to back me. So I'm going to back him. So I award the penalty kick. The kid from Notre Dame is going to take the kick. As he starts his approach to the ball, he stops. He plants his left foot. He hesitates. And the goalie then dives. And then he takes his last step and kicks the ball into an empty net. It's absolutely an illegal kick. Like there's no, I will go to my grave knowing for sure that happened. So I blew the whistle and I waved off the goal. And then I awarded an indirect free kick coming out, which is absolutely the right call in U.S. soccer. It is the wrong call in high school soccer. In high school soccer, you're supposed to give a re-kick. But I didn't do that. So the game goes on. Nobody says, like, people are furious with me because I awarded the PK in the first place. People are furious with me because they're not furious. They don't know the restart's wrong. Nobody is yelling you gave the wrong restart. They're yelling, how could you make that call? How could you make that call? He didn't stop. He definitely stopped. All right. So the rest of the game goes on. It's 0-0. In the final seconds of the game, 0-0. Same goal, but now Princeton's going in on goal. And I'm again on that side of the field because all you do is you just walk across the field. So the team switch sides, but the referees don't. So I still have that same goal line. There's less than 10 seconds in the game. There's a corner kick. The stadium clock is right there behind the goal. So I've got a great vantage point of everything. I'm standing on the line and I know what's going to happen. Like karma says this is what's going to happen. And sure enough, kid takes the shot, it crosses the goal line, and then the buzzer sounds. And so I blow the whistle and I point to the midfield. It's a good goal. And I go to the timekeeper and I say, you need to put a half a second on the clock. And he's like, we can't put half seconds. I said, fine, put 1 second on the clock. So he puts 1 second on the clock because in high school soccer, the game stops as soon as the ball crosses the line. So game finishes. Obviously, people from Notre Dame are very, very upset with me. Makes sense. And I have words with a few people. There's a mother who comes out of the stands and calls me all sorts of names, says horrendous things. And the athletic director escorts her out. And I'm driving home. And all of a sudden, like a light bulb goes bang. You gave the wrong restart. So I pull over. I look it up in the rule book. And I'm cussing up a storm. And sitting there in my truck, just cussing up a storm. So I text my partner and I'm like, hey, man, this is what just happened. And he's like, yeah, no worries. Don't worry about it. Nobody cares. And I'm like, but it does matter. There's only one scenario in soccer where a team can appeal the outcome. One scenario. And the one scenario is when a referee awards an incorrect restart. It's the only scenario. So I say that to him. I'm like, yeah, but they can require, as soon as they figure it out, they can, do this. He's like, well, you never should have made that call in the first place. And I'm like, do you really not think he stopped? It doesn't matter. That's too tough a call to make. What? It's the right call though. So like in terms of honesty, why are we being dishonest to one team because we're afraid to make that difficult call? Like everybody was so worried. I've had this conversation probably 100 times now. Everybody is on the same page that I shouldn't have made the call because it's too tough a call. But do you think he stopped? Yeah, he probably did stop. But that's too tough a call to make against that player. Well, what about the goalie? Why does the goalie why is it not a tough call to make against the goalie if I just do nothing and allow the goal to go in? Right? Like that. Why is one guy getting cheated better or worse than the other guy getting cheated? Like to me, that feels dishonest. So anyway, I said to my partner, I said, listen, I'm going to email the athletic directors and our assigner and our rules interpreter. I'm going to email them all. I'll copy you in on it. I'm just going to tell them this is what happened. He's like, don't do it. He's like, I just looked at the rule book. And I said, you're looking at the wrong rule book. He goes, yeah, but I don't care about the high school rule book. I only care about the U.S. soccer rule book. But we're doing a high school, like, right? So this level of like the willingness he had to just sort of sweep it under the rug. In that moment, I lost, and he's a guy I've worked with before. He's a great referee. I no longer want to work with him because I now know the way he thinks. And what he's saying is he would rather, in all circumstances, take the easier path, the one that will cause the least conflict. That's not the right decisions, not the fair decisions, so I'm all of a sudden with that, like we're talking about, the inability to own up, the inability to be honest, to be genuine. I've now lost all respect for this guy. It's out the window. Meanwhile, I send this email. And Notre Dame and Princeton are going to be two of the top teams in their division at the end of the season. This 2 points that goes to Princeton because of my mess up is going to matter. Like at the end of the season, it's going to matter. So I email the athletic directors and I say, this is the deal. And right away, the assigners are like, Ryan, this is why we love you, but don't worry about this. It's a mistake. It's no big deal. The athletic directors from both schools, Ryan, we appreciate your candor. It's a done deal for us. We're moving on. We're not going to replay the game. We're not going to request that we replay the game. Our rules interpreter, who's a guy who's a lot like me, is like, hold on. I want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. What Ryan is saying is that he awarded the wrong restart. This is the one criteria where the game could be replayed from that moment. So before everybody says it's a non-starter, I'm asking the question that Ryan has already asked, which is, again, why we like his honesty. But I want to make sure everybody understands. Notre Dame, do you understand you could request to have this game replayed? And Notre Dame's like, no, we're good. We're moving on. I don't do any more Notre Dame games that season. I said to my assigner, I said, listen, for this, those kids are not going to be able to see me come onto the field and not have a bunch of angst and like it's going to go sideways. Just take me off their games. But I happened to run into their coach in town somewhere. And I was like, what? He goes, are you kidding me? He goes, I want you to do all of our games. He's like, I always knew that you were above board, you were honest, you were genuine. I always knew. I would tell my players all the time, like, he's going to get calls wrong, but he's not going to get them wrong because he's out to get you or he's trying to do something, or he's going to get calls wrong because he just saw it differently than you saw it, or, whatever. He's going to make mistakes, but he's never going to do. And I was like, wow. He's like, yeah. He's like, I have way more respect for you now than I did before. And I had respect for you before. He's like, I of course I want you to do our games. The number of other referees that I work with that have said to me since then, you can't make that call, is more telling to me than anything else. Like, I put myself in an unwinnable position. It's bad. I could have just swept it under the rug, right? Like, I could have just been like, yeah, whatever. Nobody knows the difference. And part of it comes down to the fact that I know the video of that incident is on social media. And as I said to my partner, because he was the one who's like, that's going to be all over social media. And I'm like, sure it is, which is the other reason we have to report it, dummy. Because somebody else is going to watch that clip and go, whoa, that's not the right restart. They can call. And I said, and I will not be the guy standing around trying to explain why I didn't do it, why I didn't own up to it. Because I'd have to admit, if I don't own up to it, I'm admitting that I don't know the rules after all. And my ego is too big to ever say I don't know the rules. Of course I know the rules. And I made a mistake. In that moment, I was using the wrong rule book. And that's unforgivable. For me, that's unforgivable. So back to like regret and all that other sort of stuff. If I don't own up in that moment, I promise you 10 years from now, I would wake up in bed and be like, oh my God, I can't. Like, it's bad enough. I'll still wake up because I made the wrong call. But at least now I know that after the fact, I did everything I could to make it right. Now, other people outside of my control, right? They decided to not do it, which I think is crazy, by the way, because I saw how their seasons went. Notre Dame needed that win, and I think they would have won if they would have played the game a second time. But they chose not to. Good for them. But that part of it, that like own your mistake, be honest with people, it never, to your point, like if you're honest with them, are they going to be mad at you? That is one possible outcome. My experience has been overwhelmingly in all sorts of situations. When you look at a person and you say, I messed up. I got that wrong. I didn't mean to do that. I understand now that what I said was hurtful to you. I didn't understand it in the moment. I understand it now. Always makes the situation better. Rarely, so maybe not always, but very rarely does somebody say that's not enough. I don't care. And frankly, that says more about them than it does you, right? If you've owned up to something and somebody still wants to hang on to it and hold a grudge over it and all that sort of stuff, that's a commentary on them far more than it is on you. So yeah, that's an area where I am certain that you're better off always saying so. Like your mom's example is a great one. Like that guy could have said nothing. You guys never would have known the difference. Your mom, and now we're back to it, right? Like your mom spends days, right? Maybe not, but maybe she's like, God, why did I, like, does she start to question her own fitness? Does she start to do that kind of stuff unnecessarily, right? When the moment that guy said, I'm really sorry, but your paddleboard that was broke. Now your mom goes, oh, thank God it's not me. Like there could have been, probably not, but there could have been ramifications of your mom having some sort of internal self-dialogue about her own self-worth and, do I need to eat, do I need to change my diet? Do I need to exercise more? Do I need to do all, yeah, maybe you do need to do all those things, but not because of the stupid paddle boating incident, right? Like that's a great example of it's a throwaway, it's a nothing, it's a no moment, but that guy's honesty matters. It matters to your mom and it matters to you guys because now you can't give her a hard time anymore. And if you do, she gets to be like, yeah, thanks for giving me the broken paddle boat, jerks. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to go back to the piece you ended up getting to at the end about even if you got away with it, he said, sweep it under the rug. Let's not deal with it. Like they probably won't figure it out. You'll live with that regret.
Yeah.
And that'll eat you alive. So like, is that the right thing to do? Just to try to get rid of mistakes? And then, it may not eat him alive. Because I guess there are certain types of people that are okay with getting away with things. But to me, it looks like you're one of the people that it will keep coming back to you. Right. And that's one of the reasons why this honesty is so important. I think honesty encapsulates many things, right? It could be literally like never saying a lie, like never saying anything that's not factual, always saying the full truth. And I think we lie a lot more than we think because you can be going up to someone saying, "Oh yeah, you did such a great job," and whatever it might be, when you kind of know in the back of your mind that they didn't really do a great job. Or you're talking to your friend, you're like, "Oh yeah, I love to hang out with you," and it's not true.
Yeah.
And if you started being like completely honest with everyone, that's like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to go to the family reunion because I hate when uncle's always talking about politics and I just don't want to be there." Or you're telling someone, "Yeah," like someone invites you to a party, and you're like, "Yeah, I just don't want to go. I don't have any excuse. I just don't want to go." All of a sudden, that honesty is so hard to live with because then I guess people see a real side of you, and we tend to live with these white lies and like or the face that we give other people. But the one benefit that it came to my mind, I think you were telling the story of how now the coach like admires your honesty, like you're the best referee that he'll ever want. By telling everyone the hard truth, that means that when you say the truth, that means when you say a compliment, it'll really mean something, right? That if you go up to someone and genuinely say that you did a good job, they'll know you actually mean it. And I think someone who is truthful, there's just something about them that you can always know that they will give you what you need to hear. And I think that's something I admire about you, and it's amazing that you're able to live with that candor. So I love that story so much.
Well, it's also the reason that you love Coach Frank, right? So the reality is you've had days where you didn't wrestle well and you came off the mat and coach has said to you, that's not good enough. Like you didn't, like, what do you want me to tell you? Sure. You know how to do better than what you just did. So then when you come off the mat after a loss and he says to you, that was great wrestling. You wrestled your ass off today. You know that that's a genuine, that he means that. And that to me is exactly, you've nailed it, right? Like there's a difference between, no, sweetie, you look great in that dress, when she doesn't look great in that dress, right? Like there's a massive difference between, I'm going to tell another person an untruth because the truth will be hurtful. It will cause them some form of pain. So I'm not going to tell them the truth in this scenario. I'm going to let this one go. There's a way in that moment to be semi-truthful, right? Like, oh, babe, that dress is great, but I really like the blue one better, right? You're getting it across without saying, babe, that dress makes your ass look horrible. Though I think there are absolutely times where being less than truthful is the right thing to do. Building up people's confidence oftentimes means saying things to them that you know in your heart is at best a moonshot, and at worst is just there's no possible way, right? Like, especially as coaches and teachers, all the time we have to say things to our students and our athletes that are just not likely. But we need to build up that confidence, because without confidence, there's nothing, right? So to your point, yeah, you have to do that. And because you do that, and because you're also truthful in the hard ways, then when push comes to shove and you come up with another one, hey, he must really mean that, because he's been honest with me before and it wasn't pleasant. So now he's being honest with me and it is pleasant. I should take that to really mean something. So yeah, that's a great point.
Mr. Bennett, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Is there anything else you want to close with?
I can't wait to see the podcast 10 years from now with all of the other great people that you're going to do this with. And I'm going to be able to say, I was once a part of that podcast. And now look, he's also, so I'll get to do 6 degrees of separation with all the other people that you do on this. And I'll get to say, I am connected to that guy because I got to do this podcast way back when. So thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you for coming down. Look forward to seeing you this week.
Yeah. Well,
If you enjoyed that episode with Mr. Bennett, then you're going to love this episode right here with Coach Frank, who's also a wrestling coach at Peddie. Make sure you hit that link now, watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.